Ho, 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 and hello, and a warm welcome to the Minter Dialogue. My name is Minter Dial, and I'm your host for this podcast, a proud member of the Evergreen Podcast Network. For more information or to check out other shows on the network, please visit evergreenpodcasts.com. This week's interview is with Jennifer Buchanan. Jennifer is a health entrepreneur, keynote speaker, certified and award-winning music therapist, and she's also an author of several books. Her latest book is a treat, Wellness Well Played, The Power of a Playlist, that was published by Page 2. In this discussion, we talk about the language of music, how it can be used to heal, why music is harmonious, the power of silence, making intentional playlists, and much more. You'll find all the show notes on minterdial.com. Please do consider to drop in your rating and review. And don't forget to subscribe to catch all the future episodes. Now for the show with Jennifer. Jennifer Buchanan, music therapist, speaker, health entrepreneur, and Canuck from Calgary. Great to have you on the show. I was recommended to read your book, Wellness Well Played, loved it, and just couldn't be more excited to have you on my show. Jennifer, in your own words, how would you like to describe yourself?
I really liked that intro. I guess I'm best known as a music therapist. I'm a certified music therapist for over 30 years now. With that, I have a private practice that's a pretty good size, and that's where the health entrepreneur part comes in. I'm a music lover in my own life, in how it weaves through the world, watching how it's evolving, how these last 2 years it's really even changed, and how it completely is attaching to people's values. And I'm all the other things, I want to be a good friend, and I want to be good in my family. And that's where I see myself. I feel mostly lucky to be here. Yeah.
That's a beautiful place to be.
Mm-hmm.
So Jennifer, one of those nights, a fair long time ago, and I was having a wacky old trip, and I was like, what thought have I not had before? And I came up with the idea of creating a religion from scratch. And I said, well, religion has to answer certain questions this is the way my narrative, that we don't have an answer to. And so I came up with 19 questions. And one of them was, why is it that every time I ask somebody, do they like music, they say yes? So I was going to hope you could illuminate me. How is it that pretty much everybody likes music? I mean, it's got to be one step below breathing.
It's interesting. If we look at the science on this part, we know that when we hear music, particularly music that inspires us, there is no other activity in the world that lights up our brain as fully as when we listen to that music that inspires us. And as human beings, it seems the more we can light up our brain, the greater high we can get. Those rewards come back to us, and music does that so naturally, quickly, started when we were young. And I think that might have a lot of the reason to do it, why we listen.
So in my crazy theory, I kind of wanted to base it on some kind of science, and I latched onto this theory of the string theory, which felt so musical at the end of the day, because it suggests that we're all of these little vibrating strings. And so for me, this idea of the vibration, how it vibes into us. And there are some people who say that the very first language we ever had was actually music, as human erectus, or whatever it was. Maybe 3 beats means danger, or 2 beats means food time. and this idea of vibrating. So it's
Mhm.
definitely on the brain side, you get it, but
Mhm.
somehow it's really corporal as well.
Yeah, and that resonance that we are feeling between us with others continues to increase. You know, I was having this thought when I was in grade 4, many years ago. We had 3.6 billion people on the planet. We have doubled in our lifetime. Minter, there's a lot more resonating happening. There's a lot more of these musical connections happening, and where my work as a music therapist is, as I'm sitting with one of these individuals of the 7 billion people on the planet, it is about, exactly as you just said, it is about music becoming the language. When we're so entangled, it is difficult to talk about our stress. It is difficult to talk about maybe a relationship that has gone awry. But we can create music together or listen to music together and have that opportunity to begin to process it through the music and not language at all.
There's no doubt that you can relate to a song even if you don't understand a single word that's being said. I remember some African music being sung in Zulu or
Mm.
in anyway. I just remember the feeling of the vibration, the rhythms. And when I go to concerts, as I was saying before, I've been to many shows, concerts, and there's something about that feeling of the drums or the big bass, boom, as it
Mm.
just vibrates through your body. And that I think that obviously also is something about being in a room with or in a stadium with other people having the same experience. But I suppose you can also do it just by listening to your headphones too. And it still somehow vibrates into all of your body. I mean, you
Mm.
talk about sex and drugs having the same kind of feeling. Certainly sex has a more, I feel, body-like experience, but I mean drugs, sure, as well. I mean, they're playing with all your hormones and all of and part tingling inside of you, depends on which one you take, I suppose.
Yeah, but you know, you bringing up the concerts versus the headphones, absolutely you can get so much, but there is something about live, hey? You know, when we go to that live experience, I love how you connect to the drums and the bass. Have you always, has that been where your ear has naturally taken you, you feel?
Well, I'm well. The Grateful Dead are the group that I would see so often, and they have two drummers,
Yeah,
and they come from a different beat,
yeah.
and so that kind of gave you that feeling. You had the sound of wall, the sound of music. Well, no, so the wall of sound. That's the one
Mhm.
where you had
Love
all
that.
these huge speakers giving it out, and then of course Phil Lesh on bass, and so I was attentive to that. But I suppose at some level, I want to be attentive to all the musicians.
Mhm.
I'm not someone who in a classical concert is able to detect how the second violinist is playing. That's too much for me. There are some people who know how to do that. I'm, let's say, within groups of 6 7 playing, I want to be able to listen to the rhythm guitars playing and the contributions of the keyboardist, even when it's just backup. The backup singers, when what they're doing, I feel like I want to see and feel each one contributing to the group.
Totally. And you're tapping into something so important. If we're wanting to take the next step to deepening our relationship with music, often we have to break apart the different elements first. Take a
Mm.
moment with that tone and that timbre. Take a moment with the pacing, the tempo. Take a moment as you focus on the harmony. And one of my special tricks of the trade is take a moment to have your ear pick out the silences between the notes. Take that moment as you deepen your relationship. Yeah.
As you said those words, Jennifer, I got a kick of serotonin. It's crazy. this feeling, that talking of that silence. Daniel
Mhm.
Levitin, in the book that you obviously know more about it than I do, but I remember how they studied the brain on music, and how when there were pauses, those kicked up because of anticipation, if you knew the song, or what's going to happen next. And the da 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 da, or whatever was happening next. Um, that's silence.
And I misled you a little bit at the beginning where I said there's no other activity we know of that will light up more areas of the brain simultaneously than when we listen to music that inspires us. But there's actually one moment where your brain will light up more, and that's the second after the music stops.
I love it.
Right?
And I feel like that whole brain thinking
Mm-hmm.
is, which I think it was Daniel Pink, or I can't remember who wrote that, but the whole new mind, this
Mm-hmm.
idea of tapping into all of our brain, and whether it's one type of music or another, that ability to spread out around our brain and connect the tissues, even in our own brain. I think maybe that's perhaps the most healing part of it.
Yeah. And this opportunity where we can strengthen the strengths we already have. So in my world where I work often with those are who many are in circumstances they never expected themselves to be in. So it could be post stroke or a brain injury. Um, I also work with people who are end of life with cancer. All those moments that are blindside you, but music can meet you where you're at through every moment of that too, in its wholeness, where you are no longer a diagnosis when you're within the music. You are fully you in that moment at that time. And it has this opportunity to help you feel strengthened, um, regardless of what information you are working through at that time. So that's one of the areas we really focus on, is that there's always an opportunity to feel our best in the moment that we have, and music can help us get us there.
Mm.
Yeah.
At some level, I've studied a lot about psychedelic assisted therapy,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
its work with PTSD,
Mm-hmm.
with addiction, fear of end of life.
Yep.
And I was really, deeply moved when you wrote about that experience with I think it was Israeli girl who was terminally sick, and her parents had traveled. So she's 23 or 24, and you play music for the parents to dance to in front of her. Talk us through that moment, because that is just some kind of a serious moment.
This this is a fairly recent story. It was it was last year, December, and it was after several months of us frontline workers working lots of frontline. It had been a really tiring year, and I can remember as we were approaching the holiday season that there was it seemed like a natural time to take a little a reprieve. And so I got a call from Unit 47, which is our palliative care unit here at our primary trauma hospital, and it was a nurse that I know really well there, who would often come to the group sessions in the sunroom, and she would be the nurse that would take her break at that time and would dance to the music that me and the patients would be making on the unit. And you could just see her being refueled for the rest of the day.
Mm.
And so to say all that, because is impossible to say no to. So when she says, Jen, there's someone for you to see, you just say yes to those people. And I showed up. I didn't know what I was about to embark upon. I had my guitar. And as she and the spiritual care director were walking me to the room, I got exactly what you just said, that it was a young woman who was at university, going to school. She was in her, had just finished her first year, found out, diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer, came as a shock. Her parents couldn't come over to see her because of COVID, and she would be alone through this treatment and FaceTime. And the parents were working very hard to get over, to be able to come here and fly here. But you were on all these massive lists, and it was really tough. So they finally landed on December 23rd. And they called because the parents had heard of music therapy, knew what a music therapist could do. And they asked if they knew anybody. They brought me in. And I got to the door. I was completely gowned up, but because of COVID, was not allowed into the room because already the parents were there, which is at the maximum capacity, as well as the young girl. And of the young girl, I could only see the bottom of her feet under the blanket. And in that moment, you just don't know if your 30 years of training has given you enough to know what to do. You really don't. Like, okay, so here, I've got what I need. What am I going to do? And in this case, I didn't have to figure it out because Mom knew exactly what she wanted. And she just, with bright, beautiful eyes underneath her mask and all her gown, she said, thank you so much for coming. We would like you to play live music so my husband and I can dance to it. We want the last thing our daughter to see is her parents happy and dancing. And we want the last thing that she hears to be music, live music. So in this case, and looking at the age of the parents and the room and the feeling of the season, it was, I sang Love Me Tender by Elvis, and but going at the tempo that the parents were moving, and we just kept going from there. And they were able to give their daughter that experience, and were able to say goodbye to her later that evening. So, yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I said Israeli, Indian, the other eye.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What a story. Yeah. So in your work, music therapist, when I first came across it, I kind of just thought about it as having fun. But clearly you deal with many pathologies, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Talk us through, let's say, what are the typical pathologies you're working with, and which ones do you strive? Where do you think there's most opportunity for music therapy?
Yeah, so I'm fortunate to have a team of 18 music therapists now in my company. And the youngest client we see is probably around, infants. We see from infants all the way up to 103, 104. We work in a variety of different settings, some more complex than others. So we will work within the school system. We work with kids, many of whom have a diagnosis of but some that just may have some learning challenges that they are working through, and that music's going to be able to support them in. I also work in corrections, and using music as an opportunity for assessment, to find out how well people are and where they will be determined whether they're not criminally responsible or not of a crime. And so music therapy is happening in that context as well. We work in a lot of long-term care, and see many of our elders as they are aging, with again many diagnoses, but at times those diagnoses are very secondary to us. We can be our wellest during the music therapy sessions. So although someone may be diagnosed with dementia, and we recognize that, and we alter our pacing, and we alter our song selection, and all those things that are going to be happening, we will see people incredibly lucid and have great conversations with them because the music has created that opening for that to happen. We work with family units. We work in the foster system. And then, of course, medical, the palliative care, the neurorehabilitation, mental health units. Currently, we're on a burns unit. That's brand new to us as of this summer. We've started on the burn unit here in our city. So, and we've been in ICU in person for much of COVID. What an opportunity that has been. So, they say, find your niche, Jen. And it is, music therapy is our niche, connecting and finding ways that music can help people to achieve the goals that they have is what our niche is. The population, the demographic, we are open.
I mean, listening to you as I'm trying to imagine the difference between being Johnny Cash playing to inmates to dealing with kids with maybe some kind of neuro situation, autism or whatever, dementia, palliative care. I feel like there have to be specialisms within this, because not everybody's capable of dealing with a kid who's a little bit hard to manage. Not everybody's able to deal with death. So clearly dementia, or the patience that you need for that, or, the intimidation of working in a prison. I mean, so do your 18 people kind of have specialisms?
Yes. So, the education system varies around the globe. A lot of it starts very general, very much like becoming a family practitioner. You learn, you become a GP for a while. And then you do find your specialty along the way. And yes, as people move into their 3, 4, 5 years practicing, you start being able to develop those specialties and interests. Sometimes they're population specific or age specific, but sometimes they may be certain styles. So you may be more interested in the physical rehabilitation stream, and you will follow further down that road. Sometimes it may be general mental health and wellness, but it could also be very specifically around mental illness, very diagnosed, working with people with schizophrenia and chronic depression. So definitely you can find your niche. I haven't gotten there yet. Only
maybe you're good at all of them.
I don't know if I'm good at all of them. I definitely like to I really like working in complex scenarios, for sure. Yeah.
So speaking of complex things, one of the challenges that parents can have is dealing with teenagers. Adolescents. And I'm not talking about your husband or my wife, how she sometimes talks about me. Um, the ability to, well, as a teenager, you forge your identity around music. It's one of the
Yeah.
methods that we have.
Mhm.
And at the same time, often it's
Mhm.
about rejecting the
Mhm.
parents' mode and
Mhm.
donning certain styles of clothing and habits and sound that are designed almost
Yeah.
to be different, if not irritating, to the parent.
Right.
So I'm wondering to what extent you help people work through that.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I have to imagine we can reconnect through music, but
Mhm.
sometimes as a parent, you kind of need to say, well, all right, that's not my type of music, but I'm going to deal.
Mhm.
I've not been very good at that personally. I'm wondering how can one do better at that, connect in despite, let's say, a musical taste.
So Minter, as I hear all the things you say, I know that you have had a high level of awareness of how music has affected you your whole life. Not everybody is there. Some are, but not everyone is there yet. And my they're all my favorite in the book, but the first playlist I take people through is the life soundtrack. And it sounds simple. And I say this repeatedly in the book. It may be simple, but it's not easy. Not to do it with that deeper intention of connecting to your music in a new way, in a more highly elevated way, which is what I hope everyone will do after they read the book. So, Life Soundtrack is a beautiful place to start. And how I recommend people do the life soundtrack is to get several pieces of paper. You can do it on your computer, but in this case, I think I'm going to try to engage more of your brain and ask you to re engage with your writing. And you can have different pieces of paper, spread them out over periods of time in your life. So start with pre grade school. Those earliest music memories will be on that first piece of paper. The ones that can be not always the most accessible, um, but if I opened up the window to say it could have been a toy that made a certain tune or a sound, perhaps there was someone in your life that hummed to you, if you were fortunate to have that human. And then the next piece of paper will be grade school. So this will be, from that, once you have started going to school, to say junior high time, and the
So,
music
so
that
that's
you were listening.
7 to 14,
Yeah, or 12 maybe. Let's do
12.
7 to 12 there. And those are the years where if you've been in a school again, where you've been fortunate, where they brought in recorders or ukuleles or maybe a few drums, or you had music class, you may have some memories around that. I can remember trying to tap dance to Pat Benatar. I don't know why that comes back, but that's grade 6, somewhere in there. So there were those moments. I can remember singing the lion's part in The Wizard of Oz. I remember all that, in Christmas concerts. And then you go into junior high. So let's start around that 12, 13, those tweens, and up to high school. And just like you said, whew, this is where a lot of people around the world begin to collect a lot of music. It is also the music we seem to retain forever. So it will be with you for a long time. And I'm actually going to take it up to about 21 years old.
Mm.
Like it goes into university now, this collection, high collection of music. And so you're going to need 3 pieces of paper for this one as you document. And as you're documenting it, don't hesitate to write the little stories or the person you were with, or the relationship gone awry story. You know, that one where where you put the song on repeat just to get over them. Um, and yet you didn't realize you were actually anchoring them even stronger to that song than you ever were before. So all that was happening. And so you'll get to that place. And then you've got this young adulthood from 21, 22, 23 up to today, wherever you are at. And you might need more pieces of paper for that. The science is also suggesting that we only add about 5 to 15% maximum new music to that anchor to us post the age of 30, 35. So most of our music that we are accumulating is happening before the age of 30. But I want to switch those stats as well. I want us to continue learning new music as long as possible. I feel it's good for us and our brain and our well-being and just our interest in always growing, being in a growth mindset.
And if I can, it's also relevant to when you're a parent of teenagers. Yeah. Because let's say as a teenager, you have a 13-year-old to 18-year-old child, you by definition are past your 30, 35-year-old age. And so you're now having to tack on in that 5 to 15% their music.
Right. And it's important we do. This is another way we can connect to our kids. And I'm crossing a finger to remind myself to come back to a thought on the connecting to our high schoolers. But our life soundtrack, Minter, is the starting place. It is simple. It's not easy, and it's going to take time. But what an enjoyable way to spend it. And as you're doing it, you're going to remember those songs. Don't hesitate to go and turn them on. Turn on those songs as you remember them. I keep having flashbacks I keep thinking I've done my life soundtrack, because how could I not have? That's my job.
Duh.
And I just had another huge flashback of going, oh, that artist was so important to me for those 6 months at that time because of ABC. And so you can add those on whenever you can. I'll take us up to our relationship with our high schoolers. One of the questions I get a lot is, oh my God, my kid's listening to this music and I'm sure it's really bad for them.
They're taking drugs.
It's so bad, the whole thing. And the question to ask our youth is, how do you feel when you're listening to that music? It's not what is the music, although you want to know that too, because you might want to add it to your soundtrack, and you want to get to know it, but ask them first, how are they feeling? If they're not feeling more angry, more depressed, if they're not feeling more of all those things that you're worried about, they're fine. They're great. It's doing good things for them. It's helping them. I bet you'll hear words like, oh, I just really dig it. I love the groove. They're probably not even listening to the words because they're loving the groove. Do the kids say groove anymore? Is it hip? Is it groovy?
I'm worried about that one, but I certainly wouldn't.
Probably not. Okay, they have their whole language. And they might be, so to access that piece, that if they're feeling better, if they're feeling more focused, it's something I can do my homework too. It's all good. And then you can go into the next questions of, can you tell me about the band? Where do they come from? How did they start? Are there concerts around? You could ask questions around what genre would you call this? When I was putting the book together, I actually had to go to my kids and ask, okay, what genres am I now missing on my list? I had no idea there were so many genres.
Oh, and I
Yeah.
think genres, that is just one big old headache. I mean, trying to figure out between blues, R&B, hip
Right.
hop, and rap, and I mean, and just, people who are listening who are knowledgeable, like, well, duh. But for sometimes some songs seem to merge or evolve from one genre into another, and their styles are complex. Back to that word.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that is one old thing. So I love that. So ask your teenager what are the feelings that they're having as they
Mhm.
listen, and then allow them to explore their knowledge around
Mhm.
the band. And then the thing, of course, at some level, I've always associated values with my music.
Absolutely.
So there's something deeply
Mhm.
valuable about the
Mhm.
messages. And so
Mhm.
obviously in the language that my son particularly, he's extraordinary because he remembers all the lyrics of all the songs, which I've never been able to do.
So
And
good.
then two, he corrects me, of course. But two, he enjoys listening to an enormous variety of cultures. So whether it's Hungarian, Austrian, Korean, Japanese, I mean, he's Finnish. So obviously languages that he doesn't know, but he still actually knows the words that are being said. And so I think that's marvelous. You talk about the cultural connectivity that can go through
Mhm.
music. Yet, um, two things. One, I feel that today people, certainly I'm nostalgic, but I feel like today many people are yearning for the music
Mhm.
that I happen to be brought up on, which is, it turns out, 70s and 80s. And so I'm feeling like, well, it's of course it's my music, but I mean that's hokey pokey. But there is this feeling that there's somehow in this world which is lacking authenticity, some form of authenticity that's there, that these boys bands that are sort of Instagrammable are not providing. And so I'm feeling like I'm an old fart talking about this as I say it to you. But I do know that my son is now talking to me about Deep Purple and Led Zeppelin. I would say with great glee, the same kind of glee that I feel I had when I was his age. So that's great. But I'm
It's
just wondering
wonderful.
if that's also a missing component to today's music and musicians.
You know, so I'm not going to answer that question because I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if the music of that is being released today is going to have the same impact on the people who are hearing it today as the music we're speaking about has on us. I feel that there's a lot more music coming out today than there was at the time. I think that um, people have a lot of variety, and maybe it's not. There may only be a few artists and certain songs that do stand the test of time. I mean, I'm sure there are people that wrote Shakespearean like Shakespeare did, but Shakespeare seems to have broken through somehow because of something remarkable about him. Um, so there's probably music today that we're hearing a lot on the radios that is going to have that breakthrough and that impact. And it's going to be interesting to see what it is. But what I'd like to know is tell me about that music from the 70s and 80s, Minter. And not the artists themselves, but I'd love to know a bit more about the feelings you have as you look back on those for you.
Well, I have a memory of I went to boarding school in England, and I have this memory of a friend of mine, to name him John. Um, and John and I would, in his room, we all had our own rooms. We would put on an album, and we would kind of lie down and we would listen to the entire album. with the little, sounds that come through the vinyl. And so for me, there's that connection that's happening spiritually almost as you listen to this entire
Yeah.
narrative.
Synesthesia, like it's almost tactile. You can
Oh
feel
yeah.
it. Yeah.
So that's what's going on in my mind,
Mm-hmm.
Jennifer, as I recall those, and it sparks the idea of the question of Adele, who recently imposed upon Spotify non-shuffle for her album to be listened to in the order, in the manner that she wished it. And I think that is maybe a hat tip to the old folks, but I also think it's kind of a beautiful thought. What do you think?
Oh, I love it too. So you'll be interested to know how much I've been avoiding listening to the album yet because I was waiting for the LP to arrive. It arrived yesterday afternoon. And after I speak to you, I'm actually going to put a record on to listen to her album as she intended it to be listened to. So I'm so excited.
Yay. So I know Adele was one of your top 10. I had to,
Yes.
in your book, you talk about hashtag Jen's 10.
Yeah.
I had to seek it out, but I found it.
Did you?
I did. And it makes me think of another thing that I've seen happening, which I find awfully interesting, is people who dissect, decode, deconstruct songs that they do live
Mm-hmm.
for the first time that they hear a song.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
and I was even thinking, Jen, I was going to do that to you, but just for fun. But the ability for people to relate into and describe what's happening in that music. I've watched so many of those because first of all, I find that extremely talented to be able to just on the fly see what's happening, understand the nuances, dissecting the different tracks and things. I think that's beautiful. And then that sort of, oh my God, feeling.
Totally.
It gets my serotonin flying, harmonious music.
Harmonious music.
I love that term, Jen, in your book.
Oh, that's terrific. As we're talking about the albums, I do feel that is a little bit of what's been lost since the 70s and 80s and early 90s, because we have turned into shuffle. Like ever since shuffle has been able to happen, and but to listen to entire albums. So when I did Jen's 10, it was actually challenging to think about, okay, what full albums really had a deep impact on my life, where it was always I would listen to the entire album. And that is something I feel people might not connect to as much right now. Maybe if I could do a call to action that if there is a new release happening from one of your favorite artists, listen to it the way that it was intended. I love how Adele's gonna start that as a trend now, and take a moment through the whole thing, and not just listen to the top 2 that are on the radio or top 1 on the radio.
It brings up another point, Jen, that I had come across, and I was listening to that when I was listening to Brett Weinstein and his wife talking, great podcast that they do. And they were talking about a lack of community. And in the meta story, that is clear, the division and so many other things. Well, what they were doing was pointing out how in the old days, we would go to work and we may or may not have had anything in common with our coworkers, but at least we had seen the show last night, the Brady Bunch. Did you see the Brady Bunch last night, or whatever it is? I'm trying to think of something that's sort of the era. Or did you hear the tune that was played on the radio, every radio station at that same time as it was launched. It was, the B or the A and whatever it was everywhere, and everybody had a commune around that song or that television hit. So on the one hand, we have the album story. On the other hand, today we have so much splintering of music. Maybe there's a lot more variety, but the fact is that it's harder to connect because it's sort of individualized, and we're doing it in our earphones and we're listening to my music, whereas yours, well, how do I know what you're listening to, Jen? There's no communality in our community.
Yeah. And there's something positive to be able to say this level of personalization that we can do for ourselves and our own interests and tastes. But you're right. If we're, as a society, we always want to be striving towards those opportunities for collaboration, those opportunities to have a collective experience, why people love going to live concerts so much. And, I hope I address that in the book as well, when a simple request around creating opportunities for music hubs. You could do this either at work, or you could do this amongst your friends or neighbors. And just like we have a book club where we do that deep dive into a book we have all just read together. Well, now we can come together and perhaps choose, an album. Okay, let's do this album. Let's take this new album that's being released. Everyone listen to it. Let's come together. Let's listen to it again. Let's go into that deep dive. Or it could be that, bring the quiz essential. Is that the right word? How do you say that word? Quintessential. That when you're bringing that one piece of music from your high school era that speaks exactly who you were or who you aspired to be. And so you bring that one piece and you share it as a group, and, music hubs would be a great opportunity for us. I guess this is also a place where the streaming services help us, where we can do public playlists that we can share with our friends and neighbors of some of the items, the works that we love so much, the artists we love so much. So we can do that. Yeah.
Well, Jen, it's been a wonderful chat. I really wanted to talk to you about mixtapes and DJs. The cathartic element of listening to sad songs. There's really so much in there, and your book is a delight to read. Wellness, well played, well written. Jen, how can people connect with you, find out more about what you're up to, and of course, get your book?
The best place to go is my website, which is my name, so jenniferbuchanan.ca. You can find the books, you can find videos, you can find blogs. It's also a way to connect to me through social media. I love connecting to new people, and I look forward to connecting to your audience, Minter, and thank you so much for having me.
It's been a tremendous pleasure, Jen.
Thanks for having listened to this episode of the Minter Dialogue podcast. If you like the show and would like to support me, please consider a donation on patreon.com/MinterDial. You can also subscribe on your favorite podcast service. And as ever, rating and reviews are the real currency for podcasts. You'll find the show notes with over 2,000 and more blog posts on minterdial.com. Check out my documentary film and 4 books, including my last one, You Lead, How Being Yourself Makes You a Better Leader. And to finish, here's a song I wrote with Stephanie Singer, A Convinced Man.
I like the feel of a stranger tucked around me, precipitating the danger to feel free. Trust is the reason, still I won't toe the line. I sit here passively, hope for your respect, anticipating the thrill of your intellect. Maybe I tell myself there's no use in me lying. I'm a convinced man building an urge. I'm a convinced man to live and die submerged. A convinced man in the arms of a woman. I'm a convinced man, challenge my fate. I'm a convinced man, competition's innate. A convinced man in the arms of a woman. Despise revenges and struggle with deceit. Live for the challenge so life's not incomplete. What's wrong with challenge? I know soon we all die. I like the feel of a stranger tucked around me, precipitating the danger to feel free. Trust in my reason and let me show you why. I'm a convinced man practicing my lines. I'm a convinced man hearing these confines. A convinced man in the arms of a woman. I'm a convinced man, admit to the test. I'm a convinced man, I'm ready for an arrest. I'm a convinced man in the arms of a woman.